Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg Stanley. I'm here with Wes Warren. We want to talk about today the three problems that naturally evolve from a new associateship. So many doctors are afraid to take on associateship. And once you see it from our standpoint, you'll see why there's so many horror stories. They're just one failure after another. But what we're going to talk about today is common and can be corrected. So Wes, what do you see as the first and probably most common mistake made in managing associates?
Well, let me just briefly cover the three that we see. So one is quality controls. There's just a lack of oversight on the dental quality of the associate. Number two is randomness of the patients that are distributed in the practice. There's really no mechanisms for how many patients you see versus the associate. And certainly the front desk has no clue. And then lastly, there's no key performance indicators in terms of case acceptance. Those are the big three. And the first, like we talked about before, you got to figure this out in the first 90 days, first 120 days, first 4 months. Are they hitting on these three areas?
You know, Wes, having encountered this as many times as I have, one of the things it tends to trace to is so many owner doctors, by the time they send up a flag to bring in an associate, they're so burned out, toasted, tired of this process that stepping in and training an associate with the basics of selling, drilling, all of that, they want to just go home, and on days off, they just hope the associate can figure it out. Sometimes associates are pretty sharp and we get a good assistant with them and we can muddle through, but it's almost like you're saying, if you're going to do this, you've got to come back and work on the practice, not just in the practice.
Definitely, there's a little oversight here. There's a little extra work. There's no doubt about it in terms of what your responsibilities are. We try to, you pointed out, getting the team involved in some of these areas, but there are certain areas that's just impossible. The owner doctor, you doctor, have to be involved. And that's the first one, quality. There's really no substitute without your oversight.
Can I tell a story here, Wes?
Sure.
This is one of your clients. I've got a story about one of your clients because I was in the office when this happened. He had us interviewing a prospective associate, and she was young, attractive, and saw herself as incredibly capable as a dentist. But she was just right out of school, had almost no experience. And he, on the other hand, the owner doctor, was the consummate veteran. I mean, he had done it all, seen it all. He produced huge numbers by himself. She was so out of his class, she didn't know what she didn't know, but she thought she did. She thought, hey, you and me, man, we're in this. And he could tell, it's fortunate, the chasm was so wide, he knew immediately this was not a fit. He wanted an associate, but he wasn't starved for one. He wasn't desperate. And so he passed on this. It saved her a lot of grief and him a lot of wasted money and patience. So what we're talking about here, if you can tune into it and know this information is out there, if you'll just seek it out. So one thing I know, it's really helpful if when you spot somebody that seems to know so little about something that happens so often in your office, whether it's endo or crown or whatever it is, you got to step in and say, you know, we got to talk about how this is done. And if they give you that pushback of, oh, I've done 2 crowns in school, or I've done, you know, one implant or build up or whatever, you've got to be able to get past that, not throw them out because they're so offensive, but then start them down the path, start teaching them. And though they may start by saying, I know all this, pretty soon they're dumbfounded by how little they know. If you can't make it to that point, this is probably not a good idea for you, because you can encounter that kind of an associate.
There has to be some kind of agreement before you even hire this associate. The idea that there is going to be oversight. You're going to do it my way, use my materials. Are you comfortable with that? That has to be agreed upon, so that they're not rogue, and you're in the dark, and they're in the dark, and yeah, you can't. That can't be. It's just got to absolutely be agreed upon.
Here's a natural phenomenon that's almost guaranteed to find you. They come in and start burning up patients, who don't buy dentistry. So you start working harder. So you start doing better cases, seeing more cases. You're trying to make up for the drag, the wind drag they're bringing to the practice. And because of that, you don't step over and put your effort into trying to tune them up. So you intended the first week to go over there and train them up, but before you know it, 3 months have gone by. You're just trying to pay the bills. You're just trying to keep things going. So by the time you step over there, they're almost offended. Why, I've done a lot of crowns here. I've done this, I've done that. Yeah, they're already showing up to be redone. So it's so important that these, I'm going to call them disciplinary issues, not because we're saying you're a bad person, but because this didn't go right, didn't go the way we do things. I'd get right on it and say, this would be a better way to do this. And if they don't agree with it, it's probably time to make a change. That's a bad fit.
Yeah, you definitely have to review treatment. You have to review treatment plans. You have to look at the finished product, make sure that there's pictures that you can look at. That has to happen. There's the first 90 days for sure, more like somewhere around 90 days, you should get a good idea, but sometimes this can last 6 months, especially if they're new.
Another problem is a lot of our people now are getting associates because they've been at this long enough. They have a hard time making it through the day. They don't want to stay a whole day anymore. And they're going, wow, I'm tired. And I just hope that associate's picking it up. You ask the staff how he's doing. Well, he's doing okay. And so in other words, you want out, and I don't mean out of the practice, you want to slow down. You want to slow down so bad, you're almost afraid to take a hard look at what they're really doing in there, failing to sell, failing to accomplish. So those are a couple things that any of that, if that shoe fits, wear it. If that describes you.
You can't skip that step. Yeah.
Another thing we struggle with, when you do finally get somebody who kind of thinks like you, would call a crown what you would call a crown, would do what you do, maybe had some training at the same school you did. As soon as we get that, again, we turn them loose. They think like I think. They might, but they're not fast like you're fast because they're not as experienced. They don't know all the moves that you've learned in 20 years. And so the first thing we're looking for is quality. We don't want to have to redo it. We don't want missed work. When I say redo it, we have to do it first, do it to begin with. And we want it to be fast enough to be profitable. You can have somebody who thinks like you, treats like you, but because they're not as fast as you, you're actually losing money. An associate becomes a money loser. And maybe you're thinking, wow, I'm going to sell him this practice. That'll speed him up. Not usually. We got to get them up to speed, up to quality, even if it involves hurting someone's feelings. It's great if you are incredibly subtle and delicate with your wording, but let's face it, you've got to get through to them. And finally, the third one, and I got to hand it to you, Wes, this is one that you have called out. We have associates that are as good as we are. Maybe they're not as fast, but they're almost as fast, certainly fast enough to be profitable, but they lack the confidence to sell the work to begin with. They sound so unsure of themselves. Patients just don't know what to do. Now, this is not patients thinking, oh, I want the owner, he did me last time. I'm talking about new patients marketed to the practice, and they hear so little self-confidence being broadcast from this associate that it all just sounds anywhere from confusing to overwhelming, unfeasible. Why didn't we talk about this before? You know what I mean? We need an associate with confidence who can think on their feet. When the patient says, wasn't this covered the last time I was at a dentist or whatever? We need somebody who's clever enough, smart enough to figure out how to answer that question and not sit there like Adam Sandler in 50 First Dates. I think he was in that, where every patient is a complete mystery to your associate. Patients tend to behave within a certain range of responses. So we need an associate that will learn the responses, learn what you would say, is fast like you're fast enough to be profitable, or we have to face it, that's not a fit. And first of all, the work has got to be good. Which one of those, I'm just curious, Wes, from your standpoint, do you run into the most as a deal killer for associates?
The case acceptance. So
Confidence.
well, yeah, there's two areas. So not having the confidence, and so if it affecting case acceptance. So what you should do is track your own case acceptance, get a good idea of what your closing percentage is, how much per case do you average, and then track theirs and see how far off they are. If it's far off, you got a problem, because what happens is it creates a problem where they need more patients than you do to survive. And so now they start chewing through and causing the other problem on the list is where they see too many patients to produce. And all of a sudden they're taking away from patients you should be seeing, and you just compound the problem. And so case acceptance is the number one problem. If they got good case acceptance, they don't need a ton of patients.
You know, Wes, in practices that don't specialize in all big cases. In other words, just kind of your normal practice that has their eye toward the occasional big case. That case tends to come out from left field. So often it's unexpected. And to think that could end up with a fumbling associate doctor, there's at least one of those a week in most practices. And we've got to make sure that if that assistant with this doctor is trained enough that she can tell from talking to the patient, we need to bring in our owner and address this, because it's a $15,000 or $20,000 case. Whereas when this guy's done, say, well, you could do a crown and you could do this and you could do that, and the patient leaves kind of confused.
So you take a practice, Greg. Yeah, you take a practice that sees, let's say, 20 exams in a day. Okay, and you've got yourself, the owner, and you got your associate. If the associate's really bad at case acceptance, they'll need 15 out of the 20.
Right.
And you'll be stuck with 5. And this practice, this is the disaster of associateships. This is why you hear over and over and over again from your people, colleagues that don't get an associate, because you'll literally go bankrupt with an associate, because that's exactly what happens. Their case acceptance is so poor that it basically they need to see all the patients of the practice, and that's probably still not enough. So really, for me, that's number one. Case acceptance is just not up to standard, and sometimes a lot of times it's remarkably weak.
I've talked about speed and becoming as fast as you, and there's a period of time you could talk about, but let's talk about money.
Okay.
What do we want this associate producing within, say, 3 months, 6 months?
Well, we got to get them to $3,000 a day as quick as possible. So we typically give if they're a dentist that's been out of school, we give them 3 months to kind of ramp up to that level. If they're new, just graduate, we might tack on a month, maybe even 2 months extra to kind of ramp up to that level. But yeah, they got to get to 3,000 a day pretty quickly. That's the story. So if they're working full time, that's roughly $50,000 a month.
Okay. All right. So just kind of in conclusion, if you're interested in the associate program to get an associate doctor, and you slow down, either fewer hours, fewer days, or both. You're going to have to be a bit assertive. You're going to have to commit to, once again, work on the practice as well as in the practice for a period of time, because that associate has to be growing in case acceptance, like you talked about, speed and accuracy. When they watch you do a crown, endo, build up and crown, and they see it and it takes them twice as long just to cut the crown as to you to do all those other things. And you've got to be able to talk to them openly about that. This is what I need you to do. And if they say, I could never do that, it's their way of saying it's a bad fit. So thank you, Wes. Thanks for covering these things. And thank you all for listening.
All right, thanks for listening.